height, if it's at that height, well, that cannot stand on its own. It's the modular way, because actually put it at an angle. We don't want this thing to go beyond the height. Yeah, you don't appreciate it that way, but if it's like that, just superb. I started collecting, pretty much from the first time that I had any disposable income, which would be around about 1976 when I left university. I think that the collection has gone through different phases, but I think as a general principle, I think the more you advance in your career, all things being equal, you have a little bit more disposable income, so therefore you're able to afford your own peculiar indulgence.
Making history is a very straightforward project. It began with this simple discovery that there might actually be important works of Nigerian art held in Nigerian collections. That this would be an issue at all is very ironic when you think about it. Nigeria is a country rich in culture. Why shouldn't there be Nigerians who have a lot of Nigerian art in their holdings? But the whole issue about having a collection is that there are practices that need to surround the collection in order to elevate it into an international context of knowledge. It's like if you don't do that, it's like being in a dark room and hoping that somebody sees you. You can't blame people for not seeing you if you don't put yourself forward.
I grew up at Ibadan with my grandmother, surrounded by cultural artifacts. I lived in an area where you had traditional drummers, and I remember from then, the annual Egungun festivals, with some of the famous masquerades in Ibadan. So I think that, the seed of interest in Nigerian cultural objects, must have come from then. Okay. The other thing that might be of value, was that my grandmother actually went out of her way to expose me to, I would say, Nigerian culture and colonial, cultural practices at that time.
With this book, as the reviewer has said, there are some of the things we don't even have. Therefore, it's good to know that these things are here, because a lot of people think that most of our collections are lost, have gone abroad. And that was why, about 2 years ago, we put up an exhibition at the National Museum that said, all is not lost. And indeed, Femi's collections will show you that all is not lost. We have a lot here in Nigeria. We have them with Femi, we have them with Engineer Shillon. And you're all welcome to visit the museum at Lagos to see the amount of stuff we still have there. Thank you very much indeed.
I know we might not have the privilege of seeing some of these collections in your private homes, but today we have the privilege of having your book in our libraries, in our homes, and we can further our research programs on African art and in everything that really deals with our culture. So I think it's a very great privilege tonight that we have a very wonderful material coming to fruition, and some way it's going to really enhance the quality of studies in our universities. Thank you.
Many years ago, I met a person in British Museum, consulting with them about creating an art gallery, an art museum. He told me that if I built a museum or a gallery, I was committing generations to come to a task of keeping those works. That perhaps the best thing to do is to write a book. So tonight we've seen that fulfilled.
In 2008, I came down to Lagos from the US to do research on collectors of modern and contemporary Nigerian art. And a friend of mine, an artist friend of mine in the DDK, suggested that I take a look at some collections of traditional Nigerian art, which I originally was not willing to do. I just didn't think that there were any good enough collections of Nigerian art in Nigeria. I mean, in retrospect, when you think about it, that's a really surprising conclusion to reach. It's a large country, there are many artworks everywhere. I just didn't know anybody who was operating as a serious collector of traditional Nigerian art. And she said, well, let me take you and show you a few collections. And then she said, I want you to meet this man. His name is Mr. Akinsoya. So we went to Mr. Akinsoya's place. And I recognized immediately this was a very serious collector, a connoisseur. After he showed me through his collection, we began to discuss the whole issue of why this collection was not as well known and co. And that was when we decided to do a project on the collection.
In producing the book, I mean, naturally, the professor is there to analyze the collection, but I think my involvement became much more significant than I could ever have anticipated, because I had to provide all the data in terms of the item, the description, in terms of what I understood to be the name of the object, where it came from, what it is used for, and what I like about it, and things like that. But fortunately, as I said, my interest in this art form, I proceeded with a rigorous interest, so I did have a lot of that information. The more I involve myself in, let's say, this hobby, I mean, there's something that you call in Yoruba, Oju, it's like the inner, yeah. I begin to see these objects, I would say, much more clearly, and it just became much more excited. So for me, I quickly settled on the fact that these are truly masterful, great works of art.
This book, Making History, I mean, the emphasis is on making history, and it is making history. In fact, as I think 5, 10 years, even 100 years from now, I think this book is going to be a key reference book in all the universities, not only abroad, but also hopefully in Nigeria and throughout Africa.
This is an Oron mask. This mask is actually one of the older pieces in this collection. It's almost 100 years old. What's important about it, for something that was made sometime around 1915, it represents the end point of this particular tradition. This thing has continued, but you don't see complicated sculptures like this that represent this kind of form anymore. They have changed. In fact, in the book, I put in one of the newer ones, it was much more simplified. It's more like a bit of modern art with enamel painting on it. With the crocodile forms and the shape of the teeth of the masquerade, the fact that it's big enough to put on the face, we basically think it has something to do with water spirits. That's a very good representation. This Gwandara maternity figure comes from the Benue region. There is, because of mass migration among Benue peoples over the past, in the 200 years before the beginning of the 20th century, and actually right up to the end of the Second World War, there were a lot of cultural intermixing. The arts of TV, Idoma, Ikala, and all these other people in the Benue, they share certain kinds of common characteristics. And one of these is the prevalence of mother and child figures. We call them maternity figures because of that.
At the beginning of the process, that we had a professional art registrar come down from the United States. She made 2 trips to Nigeria, and I think altogether probably the equivalent of 7 to 8 weeks, of work. And she basically said to me, Femi, regard me as a registrar, for artworks. Okay, so just like a librarian that catalogs, and this is really what she's tried to do, that each object now has an accession number, which becomes the way that you identify that object, so they all have specific numbers. This object here, for instance, that is, you can see the object, you can see the tag. Okay, so it just makes it easy. All this information is being entered on a database, using this bespoke software, so that you are able to identify, just like having a unique identity number.
This is a Yoke mask from the Mumuye peoples,
There was a gentleman I spoke to at a conference at the University of California in Los Angeles, and he said there are only about 25 known examples of this object that are original, from cultural use, and this is one of them. Like this one makes it about 26 known examples. I was very impressed with this work. These vertical masks are a very complex form of representation, and this particular Mumuye type has this round ear, which makes it very distinctive from the one you see in laboring populations. This has to be the best crest mask of this type that exists in any museum or any collection on this planet right now. And I'm saying this because it's got very good aesthetics. The provenance is quite dated. It's also interesting because the reason why Idoma people started making this kind of naturalistic form was that during the beginning of the British colonial period, the British banned headhunting, and these masks were created, to represent enemy heads sometimes.
It is fair to say that as Nigerians, we have tended to emphasize and to focus on the things that divide us, whereas if you look at these works, they represent artworks from all sections of the Nigerian society. First of all, it takes us back to our heritage, because it shows that we actually are the descendants of a people who really achieved very high success, and in terms of skills in the traditional art forms. Many of these objects, when you look through them, I think it is not difficult to see that this could not have been the outcome of the minds of mediocre minds. These are people who had great imagination, who had great skill.
This is a very interesting Agere Ifa. This is part of the oracular objects used by Yoruba diviners. We believe this comes from the Adubologe workshop in Abeokuta. And one of the reasons we can be sure about that is because they went into this practice early on of giving their works polychrome, multicolored paintings using commercially sourced paints. This was exactly what the indigenous diviner was a master of, was plants and herbs and the natural world and all the elements of the natural world that had different kinds of power. Most of the time they are combining very potent pharmacological objects from this natural world to create very potent what they call medicine bags. It could be stuff that's ground down to be sprayed as a powder. It could be stuff that is poisonous just by its very nature. The gallbladder of a civet cat, for instance, remains poisonous for a very long while, dried and included as part of a sculpture's ritual accoutrement. You have to be careful not to touch it, unnecessarily. Warakwa, it's a bean pod-shaped plant with these fibers on it. And the fiber touches your skin, it will itch. You scratch that place until you scratch through the skin. It itches terribly. Those kinds of substances can still be active 40, 50, 60 years after they were made. So I advise the collector to be careful in how he handles the object.
How exactly did this collection come about? Was it that you bought a piece or two and then decided, this looks like something that I should do? Did you stumble across pieces accidentally, or did you set out to collect something like this? And secondly, for people who want to become collectors but don't have a lot of money to begin with, and perhaps not even the knowledge to recognize authentic work, how do they start?
Collecting can be a fairly expensive, innovation, but one doesn't need to be rich to be a collector. I think the interest is the first thing, the passion and all of that. Well, she can probably, I hope she can manage.
So where are we heading?
Well, this is the room that I use as a storage unit. It's as you know, this is a private residence. But with the assistance of Professor Ogbeche, we brought these boltless shelving systems in from California, and they've been very handy. So we've tried to put in as many shelves as we can without being overcrowded.
There's so much art in private hands and in private collections and so on. Some of us who collect have run out of wall space. I have my collection in 3 locations. And the funny is that you can't stop buying. You can't stop buying. So So I think we need to figure out something. I mean, publishing a book, of course, is one thing, but looking for a way of creating a museum of contemporary art, like a MoMA and so on, is what we will have to take. Again, I would just like to end by saying, Femi, big congratulations. Really very happy for you. That's all come together. Yeah.
This is a great work. This is a larger example of this kind of object. This one is called Olume because it's a kneeling female figure, you know, and it has attendants all around. The Yoruba are one of the most prolific art-producing peoples, you know, in Africa.
Generally, I'm intrigued by objects from northern Nigeria because many of them tend to be abstract. Conception of imagination, because when you do abstract works, it's actually you are marrying, you know, something that is not. I mean, I think it devolves from naturalism, and then you know, just something that a shape that suggests something to you other than what you actually see.
Now, Are Ogun is one of these major Yoruba sculptors who, along with Olowe of Ishe and Bamboya and a group of other sculptors from the Okpei region, are very well known in the literature. Their works have been greatly analyzed, and this contributes a very important object, you know, to that growing body of works associated with the artist. You understand, of course, the iconography of the warrior figure. You know, Jagun Jagun is on riding a horse. He's attended by musicians and wives, and he's just holding a rein here.
Now, this is something else. I think it's a very beautiful object, you know. So this is also from northern Nigeria. When you look at that, this is clearly the trunk of a tree that has just been gorged there. And they've created this absolutely fascinating object, you know, from the trunk of a tree. I mean, I think the artistry, the mastery and all that is unmistakable. I think this is absolutely gorgeous. Or don't you think? This is absolutely beautiful.
These are iconic, you know, ritual behavior among Ogboni people. The clenched hand is a form of greeting. But the Ogboni institution was devoted to the veneration of the earth. And this idea of holding the breast is to emphasize the fertility of the earth, which the female figure represents here. These are not sexualized gestures. These are actually ritualized gestures, you know, that have very direct relationship.
We have exceptional art in Nigeria. And we have people who are like Femi Akinsanya, art patrons, who have over a long period of time invested in art and documentation and are trying to elevate it. But we need significant more resources from the private sector and also policy-wise from government to create the proper framework for the creative economy to thrive, whether that is through policies, whether that is through even an art endowment fund where small and medium-scale artistic enterprises can apply for loans and training, etc.
I had a whole chapter on the Benin works in this collection because they were some of the most problematic pieces. In 1897, the British invaded Benin City and cleared out the Oba's palace. The strangest thing that's happened since then is that even though bronze casting has continued unbroken in Benin since that time till now, more than 120 years, all the bronze work that's been done in Benin since 1897 are not considered to be part of the Benin canon in Western scholarship. So to prove the authenticity of a Benin artwork, most gallery dealers and museums want to know whether it comes from that hoard that was looted in 1897. So that was where the problem started. Now you have all these Benin pieces, you can't even have a way of authenticating the originals because they keep saying that every Benin piece that's been produced since then is fake. So the question of how do you determine, you know, the authenticity of a cultural tradition, shouldn't it be up to Benin sculptors to tell us which of their works is authentic or not? How can you dismiss 100 years worth of production?
How can you all of a sudden, just because you said you discover God and you now want to deviate from our culture? And that is why we are crying about losing values. These are one of the things that are making us to lose values because we are borrowing other people's culture, and when we are borrowing the wrong ones.
Across the board, there's an increase in religious fundamentalism in all world religions. And this really is a very negative trend in terms of appreciating our culture, appreciating our roots. And I think for Nigerians, many who came to the exhibition, for the first time were able to see without fear the beauty of some of these beautiful artworks from northern Nigeria, from across the country, appreciate them for their aesthetic value and not seem, and not be put off by sort of a fear of juju.
Art has a purpose in the society and it communicates. So whether traditional or modern, it has a message that is passing across.
If you went into a European collector's house and you saw an issue, a sculpture form with all the accoutrements that it gets from having been used in context of ritual by, say, native doctors or indigenous healers. If you saw that in a white person's collection, it's an object. If you walk into a Yoruba man's house and you see that, then there is immediately the assumption that, this person, might be somebody who is interested in ritual practices or whatever, even if he's not. And I try to explain that, in my discussion of who Akinsanya was. This is a Christian, very well educated, upper middle class. His perception of these objects, has a lot to do with a classical interpretation of the objects as aesthetic objects that nevertheless have great cultural valence for him.
The greater joy from looking at these objects, they're all unique objects, and the imagination, some of you wonder where this kind of creativity came from. And I think that if people have just been left to continue to develop, naturally, and then to exercise, I would say their imaginative faculties, only God knows where we would have been by now.
If passion alone were what you need to build a collection, then there are many collections around, created by very passionate people. But what he's done is actually to study intensively, the objects he collects, and he's built up a very important network of suppliers, dealers as it were, who present him with artworks. You have to understand, he's competing for these artworks on an open market against European collectors. He said it took him 10 years before these dealers recognized him as a reliable client enough to show him the best, quality pieces, which puts him in the top echelon of collectors in Lagos, of which most of the other major collectors are really expatriates in that sense. So what's important about this is not just all of that. It's that when I sat down with him to discuss the collection, his mind went immediately beyond the issue of publishing it, which for most collectors, that's what they're interested in. Publish it so I can get some glory out of it. But his mind went beyond that. He was thinking about how can this collection be used, to enhance, say, education? How can we use it to create better awareness of the need to preserve cultural artifacts in this country? How can we use it to create better awareness of the need for new laws that, protect the rights of the indigenous people to their art and collect? So he had really important motives, that he was thinking about in relation to the artworks. And I was happy to use those as a basis for doing the analysis I did, which then gave the final publication a very important critical edge. This dual rider figure is the only one I've ever seen. It looks like an Edo piece. It has the canonical foliate leaf expression, the bridles. It would be a Benin piece of art, except that it was actually collected among the Esan people, Ishan people, as they say. The fact that the West was not aware of Akinsanya's work could be easily attributed to the fact that it's not been published or included in any discussions. The real question is, what prevents these kinds of works from being published? Because you have lots of scholars who are my colleagues who are working on various aspects of African art. Why is it that they are not interested in publishing this kind of collection? They do articles about the collections of white collectors all the time. Why are they not interested in publishing articles about collections based in Africa? And that's the premise of the book. The assumption is that all the important African artworks that had historical pedigree and good quality were taken out of Africa during the colonial period. This is obviously not the case, but that assumption is very powerful in the field. And what the assumption says is that if you chance upon a collection of African artworks in the hands of an African, it's most likely composed of reproductions and fakes and objects that are not worth looking at. I'm a professor, I'm a scholar, this is what I do. Why is the word of a white professor more important than mine? It's my culture that makes these objects. I have researched them, I can vouch for their authenticity. But that's not enough. So, you know, if you run into that, it's a catch-22. You can't know about the collections because they've not been published, but the collections won't be published because no one knows about them. And, you know, it just continues that way. This is an effort to break that cycle. This was one of the works that I showed to Sidney Casper and Mala Burns, who are considered very significant experts on Idoma and Benue arts, respectively. They loved it. It's a very obviously authentic object. The sculpture is just extraordinary in terms of its form. There are not many types of these original works left, in the sense that newer pieces are being made all the time. But this one, you know, was collected, and it dates quite back.
Issues of our archaic laws and the fact that in Nigeria today, a Nigerian is actually not allowed to buy or sell an antiquity. And these laws need to be reviewed so that we can actually exhibit our art in a proper way, and so that the dealers and people who find these kinds of pieces can also gain recognition and be seen as art experts rather than doing things in the shadows.
The laws were well intended, because it is just that they have not been updated for so many years. And I do not think that the existing laws that we have are any more in consonance with the requirements of the present time. So therefore, what I have done essentially is to put myself under the cover and the umbrella of the Nigerian National Commission for Museums and Monuments, you know, by trying to get the top echelon of this institution, which has been the body that is legally empowered to look after artifacts and to superintend what we do with them in Nigeria, to let them be aware of what I'm doing. And, you know, so they have been very supportive. And I think that, you know, that is the minimum that I thought was necessary, and that hopefully whatever we do it in collaboration with like-minded people, including, you know, importantly, the Commission for Museums and Monuments.
We must pay attention to our art. It is that is our essence. And if we don't do it, others will continue to tell our stories for us.
That's the whole point of what Akisai was trying to do. It's time we took this initiative. You know, it's very interesting. He's not worrying about what people are going to be saying about the book out there. He's actually worried that the book reaches enough people here in Nigeria so that there is a greater sense of urgency in the country about managing and preserving our own cultural heritage.
You know, these works are very valuable. How do you intend to conserve them beyond this beautiful documentation that we have here today? Thank you.
We have not embarked on any professional conservation work on any of these objects. You know, so that is essential. And these, we are moving into a territory that are totally outside the realms of an enthusiast. You know, I need professional help. And that help would only come if people believe that there are sufficient important works that merit, you know, that kind of collaboration. So that would be my own desire, you know, to get help from people who are sympathetic, you know, to further refine, my collection, to help me to sharpen my eyes, you know, to help me to deepen my interest. I hope it will be a lifelong, endeavor for me. But basically, to go through this collection, very serious, painstaking, professional conservation of the objects, you know, to be sure that there's no further deterioration. I also want that process to clean the objects, you know, in the best international, to the best international standards available at this time, so that we can better appreciate the artworks.
It is in the foregoing context that I place the significance of the book that we've come to launch today. Besides calling for a review of the existing largely Western inclined canon of African art, the book should be seen as a wake-up call for massive investments in the development of contemporary art and culture, which will be bequeathed to future generations. It also draws attention to the many works in other African collections waiting to be explored. The history has been made by the Akinsanya African Art Collection and the book on it by Professor Obechi. The world of African art will never be the same again. And on that note, it's my great pleasure and privilege to present and launch the book, Making History.
The Making History launch was a perfect way of showcasing the significant work that a Nigerian collector has done to impact the world view of traditional African art.
I am interested in using the collection to interest, I would say, a new generation of people in Nigeria to really start appreciating the aesthetics of these works. I'm hoping that the government would take a cue, and rise up to their responsibilities, because I think that they are the fundamental custodians. Individuals can only do so much. Okay, there is a lot of work, to do. Now, ultimately, my ambition would be to be involved, and I do not know what the processes that will lead to that, but to explore every opportunity and all possibilities that may enable me, I hope in my lifetime, to have, if you like, a small building, a museum, a gallery, call it what you will, where all these objects can find, if you like, a permanent home, world-class quality, to have a group of professionals who have the most up-to-date skills in terms of museums, management, conservation, and what have you. This is not an ideal setting, and beyond the point, if you have an important collection, and I hope, as I said, the jury is out, but should this prove to have any sort of importance, then the collection gradually goes beyond the collector. It moves into the realm of some kind of a public trust.